Hi, this is Anea Dixon, and this is for the Performance of Literature class, Unit 2 Reflection and Evaluation. So, I have chosen to do my Unit 2 performance poem over Lucille Clifton's Won't You Come Celebrate With Me, or Won't You Celebrate With Me. And we're going to be asking about 4 questions to give a good analysis over what I thought about my own performance. So starting off with number 1, discuss the concepts that I've learned from the book and lecture informed for my analysis of my poem. Basically, what did I learn from the book and my lectures that informed my poetry performance? First and foremost, we're going to be getting these citations from the Pelias and Schaeffer 2nd edition book from chapters 6, 8, and 9. So first and foremost, some of the things that we learned from the Pelias and Schaeffer book were about, first of all, dramatic analysis. What this means is how do we use specific stylistic elements within our choices for how we speak, how we act, what perspective we use, what persona we use, how we enunciate, all these different aspects. These all make up the dramatic analysis. And within Chapter 6, dramatic analysis can be expressed in all these different ways, so within that, I've chosen from what I've learned from Chapter 6 about dramatic analysis to express my poem using a first-person persona of a female character, just like Lucille Clifton did. The female is suspected to be a minority or of a marginalized community, just like Lucille Clifton's original character was meant to be, because it's talking about the African-American experience as it relates to a lack of role models and leadership within the system. So, I've chosen to do this also from the same poetic structure in the sense that we're looking from the same persona, a marginalized female looking back on her life and recollecting about all the goods and bads that have come and how she has learned from her experiences, having to teach herself, so to speak, from her experiences. Continuing on, when it comes to my analysis of the poem, I utilized this perspective that was already given by the original author Lucille Clifton to paint this image of a successful woman. Rather than in the original poem, it was spoken from the perspective of what was likely a marginalized woman who was coming from a system of inequality or struggle, but in my poem I chose to switch the lens to see the goods of coming out on top. The poem that Lucille Clifton wrote, one of the lines in the poem was that I had no role model, but rather than taking that from a system of struggle, I looked at it from a system of power and utilized this to make my persona who was speaking openly to her highfalutin dinner guests at a table. Continuing on, in Chapter 8, we learned from the Pelias and Schaeffer 2nd edition book about form and content. Both of these can be expressed by your body language, tone, posture, intonations, so on and so forth. But how you actually elicit yourself through your body and through your emotions can also elicit mood and feeling within your poetry as well. So with the form and content of my poem, the poem itself is, if I'm not mistaken, something of a sonnet. It repeats only 2 lines, which are, won't you celebrate with me, and come celebrate with me, halfway through the poem and at the very beginning. With that being the case, the form is meant to re-envision the idea of celebration. She talks about how she had no role model, but by repeating, won't you celebrate with me and come celebrate with me, it's showing that she's not trying to look at this as, from the lens of, oh, pity me. The speaker wants you to celebrate her triumphs with her. Therefore, within my poetry, I utilize this idea of overcoming as seen by the successful marginalized woman persona and giving this poem in a happy way, a triumphant, happy manner. Because just like the last line of the sentence or the poem says, come celebrate that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. We're looking at this expectantly. Every day there has been hardship, but we have not let that overcome us. Next, and finally, we want to talk about sequencing pattern. The sequencing pattern, which is discussed in Chapter 9, can be expressed within how the poem is rearranged. So as we talked about, there is that level of repetition. However, only one line was generally repeated, and therefore we repeated that line happily. At the beginning, I used my poem, I was happy when I said, won't you come celebrate with me, but at the end, we're more exultant. Every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. Now, number 2, talk about the process, how my poem evolved. I started this poem by looking and thinking I was going to talk about it from a very sad persona's perspective, but then I realized as I learned more about Lucille Clifton, she's not trying to talk about her poetry from a perspective of struggle. She talks about her poems from the perspective of triumph. Therefore, my poem and the nuanced ideas going into the poetry morph themselves to being more optimistic as I continue on the progression. Number 3, what elements in my performance were effective? I think that for me, my tonality was very good. I tried to use good vocal intonations to try to reflect a happy and triumphant woman who's trying to give her after dinner speech, so to speak, in a way that's used to enlighten others. We're supposed to be talking in my poem. My speaker is supposed to be talking to an open setting of dinner guests. The audience was the dinner guest, and since I looked out into the audience very openly to try to engage them in an open setting performance, that's how we are able to utilize this to show our purpose within who I'm talking to and the purpose of my poem. Secondly, I think that I did a very good job of using my prop. It was a simple spoon and glass, but it made the point that I'm talking openly to try to just call attention to a point of significance in my speaker's life. So, number 4, where did I see a lack of clarity and particularization? I think for me, the biggest lack of clarity was probably at the very end prompting. Closure, for me, I kind of just stepped out and motioned with my hands that I was finished, but prompting at the end and closing with something other than, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. That was good closure enough, but I feel it could have been more physically exuded. And number 5, if I was doing this performance again, what would I do differently? I would probably speak a little slower and use more vocal inflection to show that I was finishing and closing my poem. Now, based on the poetry rubric, what grade do I think I earned? I think I'd give myself a solid A-, maybe A+, because I followed all the exact lines within the poetry guideline. I had all the poem memorized. My prop was functional, and I think conclusively I did a good job with trying to follow the rubric, tying in my own experiences and interpretations into the poem, while also upholding what Lucille Clifton's original purpose was for her poetry piece. So with that being the case, thank you so much for listening, and conclusively, I've had a good job with a good time just doing this poetry analysis. Thank you so much.